Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Immutable Mindset. Today, we have a true creative powerhouse joining us, an artist who has risen through the ranks to become a household name in the world of sports, entertainment, and now the ever-evolving landscape of digital art. Born in San Francisco, Blake has been compared to the likes of Shepard Fairey and Alec Monopoly. With a passion for drawing that began at the tender age of 4, his journey to professional artistry has taken a unique path. Coming from a creative household, his parents encouraged Blake to study art, but he chose to pursue economics at UC Davis, later working in a digital marketing firm, a range of clients from Fortune 500 companies to startups. However, on his 30th birthday, he decided it was time for a change. And following a trip to Barcelona, Spain, he was inspired by the city's rich street art culture to make that change. Upon returning to the U.S., he set up his first art studio in the rustic barn in Marin County, which we've just found out he's continuing to work on, where he's honed his craft, creating vibrant portraits and experimenting with mixed media. His big break came during a trip to Las Vegas, where he met former NFL player and current NFL manager Jared Faison, who encouraged him to paint for professional athletes. Since then, he's become the premier painter, portrait artist for NFL athletes, and has made a name for himself in other professional sports. And to end here, in 2020, he began working with Topps, redesigning iconic baseball cards for Project 2020, and later launched his solo set, Topps 1951 by Blake Jamieson, and is currently working on Project 70. His art can be found in the collections of celebrities like Howie Mandel, Gary Vaynerchuk, and Rick Harrison, as well as over 250 professional athletes across various leagues. His work is also featured in an international private collection spanning Spain, Canada, Dubai, Australia, and Switzerland. Please, everybody, give Blake a warm welcome to the exceptionally talented Blake Jamieson. I kind of messed up a little bit there, but I did my best to edify you.
Great.
Blake Jamieson, this is your life.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, man.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, welcome to the show. Blake, now that I have done an extensive intro and kind of brought us up to speed and the audience a bit up to speed on who you are and why you're here, I'd love to go back to the childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start there. Let's start. Can you share any specific moments or experiences from your childhood growing up in that creative household with your parents where you felt like you were truly ignited, or was there a moment that truly ignited that passion for art?
I don't think that there's any single moment as a kid, but I think that I was always drawn to different types of creativity. So I really liked, I would wear costumes to school just because I thought it was more fun than wearing regular clothes. And yeah, I mean, like I said, it wasn't anything specific. And like you mentioned in the intro, my parents are very, very supportive of my creative endeavors and have been since I was a kid. And so when it was time to go to school, they were encouraging me to explore studying art or art history or something that would be more creative than the path I chose of economics. But, society's kind of stigma of the starving artist is pretty pervasive. And
yes,
very young, I was 17, 18 or whatever when choosing my college. And yeah, I was scared. So got into what I thought was a more safe and I guess serious career path in digital marketing. It was pretty good timing because social media was just starting to kind of take off for businesses. Businesses were starting to use Facebook. Facebook started to roll out advertising, and I was kind of on the front edge of that. And so my first job in tech was with Zynga, which was a pretty big gaming company in San Francisco. And it was cool because Zynga is, it's a gaming company and it's a lot of cool art. And so it didn't allow, I wasn't making art per se, but I was doing kind of marketing, but trying to do it in creative ways that still stimulated me creatively.
So given that you grew up in that creative household, who, and that you're kind of trying to figure out your way, and like a lot of us that are creatives and artists, we don't think that we can truly make a living on that art. Who were you listening to, or who was in your ear to help you out? Since it sounds like it was your parents that were encouraging you to go the art route, who might have been encouraging you to go the other route, the more traditional route?
I mean, I would just say society as a whole. And that was just I don't know, I feel like I have not really expensive taste, but I like nice things. And I've known, from when I was a kid, if I wanted money, I needed to work for it. And so, I was very heavy in the lemonade stand enterprise. And yeah, I don't know. So I think that economics was just like, to me, just seemed like a safe bet. It was fine. I have no regrets, but I wasn't a very good economics student. And the things that I learned in those classes, I mean, they got me to where I'm at. So that is what it is. But I didn't feel like anything that I like learned in school, I was like, "Ooh, I'm applying this in my job." It didn't really matter.
Yeah.
Like, out of curiosity, I come from a home. My dad is an artist. We've had this conversation. I have the pleasure to hang out with you a couple of times. We know each other. My dad was an artist. He professional artist, design background, went to Pratt and everything. So I grew up in a creative household. May I ask, what did your parents do for a living? It's always interesting when I meet artists because I love to hear about their home life.
Yeah. So for most of my childhood, it was only my dad that worked. My mom did a little bit of retail to chip in, but my dad is a computer programmer, and they met.
Yeah. I saw he created your website, right?
He did, yes.
Nice. I was gonna get
Yeah,
there.
shout out dad. Yeah, so my dad studied film and photography, and my mom was also involved in like drama, and so they met at like the after party for like a play in, I guess it was in college. And so my dad was like pursuing creative outlets, and then they like got together and got married and had me pretty quickly. And so that obviously like changes priorities you know, for parents, new parents. And so it was before I was entering kind of the internet web 2.0 age of social media stuff, web 1.0 was just coming out. And so my dad saw that opportunity and got one of those giant encyclopedia style books on C++ and started to learn and teach himself how to code.
Comes full
And
circle. So
he
they get it, right? They get it. They get what you're doing.
yeah, yeah, they do. And they're still I mean, so supportive. The house that I'm sitting in right now taking this interview is the same house I grew up in.
That's
I've
amazing.
I've returned home. So
How do you think that, seeing that experience of seeing your dad just pick up a book and figure it out, in terms of yourself, right? Going the traditional digital marketing route, but realizing like that's not really where, where you're where you need to be. And then in the words of Matt Higgins, burning the boats and
in the
realizing that
ships.
art is the way. How did maybe that, seeing your dad go through that, or seeing him just figure it out, inspire or maybe help shape your ability to do that? Or do you think it did?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it was actually pretty recently that I had kind of this revelation. We have this like 2-acre property here in Marin,
Mhm.
and both my parents live here. There's a second, like a guest house, which my grandma lives in, who's actually the owner of this property. And we have a really cool setup. My sister lives 5 minutes down the street. She's got 2 kids, so I'm getting to be fun uncle. I'm back home with my parents.
Funkle.
Nice.
Exactly. And so I just came back from New York pretty recently, and then realizing, like, I thought that coming here was gonna be this stepping stone of like, well, I'll land here, I'll get my bearings back in California, and then I will
Yeah.
branch off again on my own, which, is what we do as people. But as soon as I got here and I kind of realized that like this property, this land has everything that I need and want, and all the people, that I care most about, all in
Amazing.
one little place. And so I just had this kind of like overwhelming sense of gratitude that my parents figured out a cheat code in
Yeah.
life where they could end up right here, right now, where they've got, my mom's here, she's got her grandkids, she's got her, friends. And so I was, talking to my dad and just saying like, man, you guys really kind of figured it out. Like, good job for you guys. And thank you for what I interpreted as kind of stepping back and like sacrificing maybe like creative pursuits in favor of like something that's going to be more like reliable. Or
Wholesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and his response surprised me because he's like, well, I like it just like changed the type of art that I was doing, and still explained that like to him, like learning to code and building things with ones and zeros is
Mm,
not that far off from like using a paint and canvas. It's just a different
100%.
medium. And so I
That's
thought that was
powerful.
fun, and that was a conversation that happened just in the last few months since I've been back here from New York. So
It's got to be powerful being in that environment, like that, like just honestly, you describing that environment and what I have goosebumps right now. Man, that's a dream, right? To have the whole family
That
together, to be
communal
in a
tribal
community,
vibe.
right? That communal, exactly. Everybody helping everybody. I feel putting your art studio in that space in a rustic barn, that's quite a unique choice, right?
From Brooklyn, right?
How do you
Going from that Brooklyn to
right
that,
from
man.
Brooklyn,
Mhm.
right?
Different
That's
Yeah, but
vibes.
I mean, Brooklyn was like a pit stop in my adventure of life,
there you
all
go.
things considered. Like, I've always considered myself a California kid, even when I didn't live in California. But
Yeah,
yeah, man, I mean, I try not to take it for granted because I know that the
yeah.
situation that I've like ended up in, and a lot of it doesn't have to do with me at all. It's just like being born into the right family at the right
Hmm.
time and them giving me the right opportunities. I just feel really fortunate.
So as we're, when we were just meeting each other for the first time, Adam cued you on, in terms of what you're building out there in the barn and kind of what you're doing in Marin County right now. Have you noticed as you've been developing that, you mentioned you're putting more soundproofing, which has been messing with the Wi-Fi,
Mm.
but as you've been adding character to the space, as you've been making it your own, has that affected the evolution of your artistic style? Has anything changed about that, or is this just a process to continue doing what you do?
Yeah, good question. Only recently did I kind of come to this understanding that creating the spaces where creativity happens. So whether,
Yeah.
building out a studio space is really something that's awesome, like really fulfilling to me. And arguably I've had this kind of internal dialogue of like, man, I kind of feel like building the spaces that are like conduits for creativity is more purpose driven than just creating a piece of art itself. And so that's like really it's fun, and it's something that I've been doing ever since I've started like making art, is finding these spaces and then making this nook into like this little spot that'll inspire me. And I tell people about like you think about the room that you guys are in, or that I'm in, that listeners are in, or whatever. There's like thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of songs playing in that room at that time. All types of genres of music, gospel, rap, country, like anything, right?
Yeah.
Reggae, whatever. But we can't hear it unless we take a tool like a radio and we tune it right to the right frequency. And then all of a sudden, oh, we're locked in on this classic rock. And now we can hear it. We're aware of it. And so in that case, like the radio didn't make that song appear in the room, but it allowed you to tap into it. And so I think about like creativity as that like radio dial,
I love it.
and being in different environments will kind of tune you to a little bit different dial that will pull out different inspiration and different
Yep.
creativity than other spaces
And
could.
out of pure curiosity, as someone who's an avid follower of your Instagram stories, how's the gardening journey going, man? Like, how therapeutic, creativity, nurturing? How is that contributed to your artistic and entrepreneurial mindset?
It's awesome, man. Yeah, so and I'll back up a little bit. So we have this 2-acre property, which has, since it's been in the family since 1968, it has always been horse property. There was at one point 10 horses that my grandparents boarded, and that was like their side hustle, really. My grandpa was a plumber, but they raised
Babysat
horses.
horses.
We have all this land where for 50 years it's been getting nothing but like fertilizer via horse poop,
Nurture.
which is cool. So
Oh,
when our
rich soil.
yeah, our last horse, who was almost as old as me, he was 35 years old, and he passed away, I guess, around Christmas time. And so we had all these like horse fences up, and I had this idea for my grandma, who was very attached to that horse. I said, why don't we plant a tree in Spook's paddock,
That's
and we'll
awesome.
call it Spook's tree. And she liked that idea, and then I kind of meditated on it more, I slept on it. Then I woke up the next day and I was like, Grandma, I think we should do a whole entire garden. We should take the whole kind of pasture behind the barn, where it's like a horseshoe shape kind of that wraps around the barn where my studio is at the very end of it. And let's start planting it. And she said, that sounds great.
Blake,
Love it. Thanks for sharing, man.
I, that yeah, I do, and I want to pick up on that story right there, and it reminded me of something as I was researching you. You are somebody that it seems like will have an idea and run with it, and you are that artist that understands that when you have that creative thought, you have to do it at that moment, or it might flee. It might flee. And I say that, in terms of the garden that you produced here, and then the tree, and doing that for your grandma. You went to Joshua Tree
Hmm.
for a vacation,
Hmm.
and at that vacation, you saw a cactus and a bubble.
Hmm.
Do you mind telling the audience the story, and what's come about out of this?
Hmm. Yeah. And yes, to answer your like to touch on that, like I try to stay open-minded to whatever the universe throws at me idea-wise, and if something
Yeah.
really kind of sticks, I do kind of try and go and do something that'll get that momentum going. And so, like you mentioned, I was in Joshua Tree. Man, it's been, I guess it was like 2 years ago now. So it was 2021, and I was sitting in this beautiful property, and they had all these barrel cactuses on this patio. And for those that don't know, barrel cactuses, like they look like a bowling ball, basically, with just the barbs. Very pretty cactus, but also very sharp, and tough. You don't want to run into it in the dark.
Nope.
And so it was kind of windy. It was like a nice summer day, and I was sitting out there blowing bubbles because the host who had brought me had brought bubbles for everyone as
Why
just a
not?
fun, like, party favor. And I'm blowing it, and it keeps hitting this cactus. Pop, blow it, pop, blow it, pop, and then I blow one, and it just perfectly, the wind just catches it where it just lands right on the prick of this cactus, and it just, like, so delicately balanced there. And when that happened, I had this, like, vision kind of flash in my mind where it was like bubbles and cactus were like the two
I love it.
unlikely best friends of the desert,
I freaking love it.
and decided, I'll back up a little. I've wanted to make a children's book ever since that I've had it become an uncle, because the kids love books and it's fun to read to
Stories.
them. And I just thought, man, how cool would it be if I could read something that I wrote? And, working in art, and especially in NFTs, actually, like I had learned that I didn't need to make everything that I produced.
Yeah.
Production itself could be working with artists and helping facilitate, a creative idea. And so I found this illustrator, this young kid in Mexico, 20 years old, really cool style, very approachable illustrations, cartoons. And so I sent him a bunch of reference photos of the actual cactus and the bubbles and explained the idea. And it was perfect. The match that he came back with was like the vision that I had in my head. So for the last 2 years, we've been working together to develop a whole slew of children's books. And now it's looking, with this kind of multimedia studio that we were talking about, I actually plan to do puppet shows. And I
Nice.
think,
Oh,
like,
that's
that's something that
awesome.
I just,
That's
Might have to
awesome.
take a road trip with the kids
I
for
know,
that
I
one.
think it's
Yes.
gonna be, I'm gonna have it set up to
S-
like film them really
Yeah.
nice.
So interesting to that, and so you had that moment where you were like, "Oh, I have this idea." So this was one of the last things I heard about you when I was researching you, and it gave me an immediate idea. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, he has these two nephews. It'd be really interesting if he created this book into an NFT,
Mhm.
made the characters into NFTs, gave those NFTs to his nephews, and then maybe you started, again, this is just an idea. I'm not pushing you to that. But you consider turning the book into a communitized NFT project where the owners are the characters, right? They have input of the direction of future books. Maybe they get airdrop those books if they have a lot of input into the direction.
Mhm.
But like when you said the idea, I was like, oh my God, this is an awesome NFT project. Thoughts?
Yeah, I have explored ways to make Bubbles and Cactus some type of Web3 project. And
Nice.
I have, the book illustrations itself. I also had basically a 10K generative project made with those characters. So it's the Bubbles and Cactus character, but then we have all the different facial expressions and hat, cowboy hat, neck, and different expressions and things.
Nice.
So I had that. I've been sitting on that for like, man, like a year. But as you guys know, the market it's been a wild couple years in NFTs for me, but especially over the last year, it just felt like I just kept waiting for something to kind of click back into place. And then it was like, oh, FTX blows up. Oh, this thing happens. Oh, this is a scam. Like,
Yeah.
man, I appreciate Web3 tech and what it can do for artists, and
Yeah.
what it has done, right, for a ton of artists, including myself. But it's still like a very, very new space. And part of me is, I don't want to pigeonhole Bubbles and Cactus into only a Web3 children's book concept. I want to have the traditional
Yeah.
children's books,
A book.
as well as like other modern assets like NFTs that would go with it.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And yeah, I certainly understand, especially from what's happened and a lot of the sentiment in the market. This is probably not the best time to be announcing Web3 NFT projects with that. And it's the same as like big brands, right? Like we talk about this, me and Adam. Big brands aren't out here. They're probably working on Web3 and blockchain, but this is not a time when you're going to be announcing that stuff. So no, that makes total sense. And you know, in terms of NFTs and kind of the digital art aspect of things, one of the again interesting things in terms of researching your background was your collaboration with Topps. And then for me personally, as an athlete and somebody that used to open up more card boxes than I'd like to admit, sorry mom, you worked on Project 2020 and Project 70, which allowed you to really reimagine baseball cards of in themselves, especially when it comes to digital art. And it's some of the coolest. When I had no idea about this, so I'm saying this like real time. When I saw the art on this card, oh my gosh, guys, if you have not seen it and you were ever a collector as a kid, you've never seen better art on a card. It's freaking amazing. Like,
Thank you.
oh my gosh, like seriously.
Let me jump in on.
Please go ahead.
Let me jump in on that
ahead.
one, Kevin. So So I am a diehard Mets fan. 4 feet away from me, right over there in my office, I have my two Shea Stadium seats right there.
This is true.
And I live and die by the Mets. The Mets are my team. It's my sometimes before my wife and kids. No, I'm kidding. It's the Mets. No, I'm sorry. Wife, kids, Mets. Yeah, you get it. So again, big fan of Blake's Instagram, and I saw on one of the slides. I caught my eye by a second because it was never an official card, but it was one of those moments in baseball, especially if you're a Mets fan. Take it back to 1999. It was an extra inning game. I think it was like a 14-inning game. Bobby Valentine was a coach of the Mets at the time. Bobby Valentine gets kicked out of the game in like the 13th or 14th inning. It's late. It's like a September game, I think it was. This guy goes back into the clubhouse, Bobby Valentine, comes back out into the dugout wearing a black Mets t-shirt, a black Mets hat, and a mustache and sunglasses on. It is like a like if you're a Mets fan, that moment just sticks in your head for many reasons. One, because it just reminds you that it's just a fucking game. It's just a game, and reminds you to laugh and not take things seriously. So when I saw that card come up, I literally have chills talking about it. I'm like, Blake, I got to get a copy of it. So fast forward a week ago, Blake has these mystery boxes that he's sending out, and I didn't open my full box yet. But by the time this video comes, we'll put that video out there. But I had to open it to take out the one card. And in there, and Blake, thank you so much. Like it's going to go on my wall right over here. Is that card in a sealed, thick plastic case? And I'm so thankful to have this piece of memorabilia that it's the Mets and someone I deeply admire and respect coming together. So I just want to thank you for that, and I'll share that picture with everybody when the show airs.
Yeah, man. Thank you for the support.
So here's the question, though: how the hell does that image and that card come up in the conversation of doing the project? Like, all right, we don't have an official card of this, but that was a moment in baseball.
Yeah. So, I started with Topps in 2020, like you mentioned, with a set called Project 2020. And that had 20 different artists that Topps recruited, me being one of them. And then they gave us 20 iconic baseball cards, most of which were rookie cards from a lot of the kind of the legends of the league, right? And so there was very... in the grand scheme of things, a little bit of creative freedom, because they said you're painting, or not just painting, you're making cards, remixes, right, for these 20 players using these 20 reference images. And so beyond that, you could play with it. But the follow-up set to that as a group artist set was called Project 70, which was last year. And the main difference in Project 70 was they let the artists choose their own subjects as well as their own reference images. And so we did have to get we did have to get it cleared by Topps. And so there were a few players that Topps did not have the license to. For example, I wanted to do a Michael Jordan baseball card, which would have been really fun, but Upper Deck has the rights for that. Anyways, so when that set came out, at first I felt like I was kind of playing it safe. I was like, oh, I'm going to do Mike Trout and Bryce Harper and these guys that are going to sell well, because I am a commercial artist and I want to make money.
Yeah, of course.
But
I mean,
then
you gotta sell it.
I got a couple under my belt, and I was like, man, why would I just like play it safe and do what Topps just had me do? Why not do something totally different? And so my dad and I grew up going to baseball games here in the Bay Area. We had season tickets to the Oakland A's. For a while in my childhood, we moved to Florida, and then we were going to spring training games, Texas Rangers, Sarasota, and Bobby was there. And so, when I was a kid, my dad bought all of the cards, which was junk wax era. I was born in 85. So starting in 85, he just started buying
in my basement, man.
Two of everything and just setting the sets aside, being like, this is college fund, which I think a lot of parents did. But despite the fact that like they were never really worth that much unless you got like the Frank
Mark
Thomas
or
No Name is a really expensive card from that decade, but regardless, like there's really not very many. But we pulled them back out and we started going through like the memory box, both of cards as well as like photographs
so much
from
fun.
spring training and stuff. And there we found a picture of Bobby Valentine holding me as I believe I was like 5 years old
Oh, no
and
shit.
kind of like upside down. He's like, doing one of those like thing, just playing
No
with a kid.
way.
And it's just so pure, like the happiness and the fun there. And then my dad was saying how nice of a guy Bobby was. And yeah, and so that kind of that inspired it. And then I started doing some research and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna do the players that I have the most context with just to have some for myself. And Bobby was one of them. And then I start looking up, stories. And I didn't remember because I grew up an A's fan
Right.
and
You
didn't
weren't
follow the Mets that much. I didn't know about that moment until I was like an adult and doing the research for the cards. And then I'm like, oh my God, that's freaking amazing. And
That's
yeah, just the
great.
picture, just so funny. He looks like
He's sitting on
Magnum
the
PI.
just sitting on the bench, kind of just like hunchback there.
Another one though that I had met that was also from childhood was Brooks Robinson. And
Ooh.
Brooks was at that point, I think he was like coaching at spring training or something, or like one of the I don't know, facilitators or whatever. And so he had already like had a very prolific career. And I had remembered my dad always talked about his magic glove because nothing could get by him. And one day after spring training, my dad offered to drive him back to his hotel, which was near our house in Florida. And so my dad's driving, Brooks is sitting in the front seat. I'm sitting in the back seat with Brooks's gear bag. And we get there and my dad turns around and suddenly he's super embarrassed because I'm like, I've got the bag open and I'm just digging through, pulling
Pillaging.
stuff out, and he's like, Blake, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm looking for the magic glove. And I don't know whether or not I found the glove, but the other funny part of the story that like embarrassed my dad at the time, because he was like, let's see. So if I was like 5 or 6, he was like early 30s. So he's young. He was younger than I am right now. And I said, oh, my dad wears the same underwear and pulled out these like tighty whities out of the bag. And my dad's like, oh God, this guy's like a legendary baseball player. And I'm here like, driving him home and my son's pulling out his underwear.
Oh man.
So that was fun too. And we have this photo where I'm standing in front of Brooks and I'm holding a ball up that I assume he had signed or given to me. And so we ended up making that image, which is a photo that my dad took as like a chase card. And that's the only painting of my Topps art that's actually hanging in my parents' house is this Brooks Robinson card where my dad took the
So
reference photo.
meaningful.
Yeah, and it just
There you
has
go.
fun stories.
Well, I think you've redeemed yourself since then. I think everything's okay. I think your dad is cool with all that at this
Yeah.
point.
All right. Story time.
And
Story
both
time's
of
over.
those
Let's get
guys
to it.
too, I've been able to contact Brooks and Bobby and send them some cards for them to keep that I made. And
Oh,
then
no way.
also
Nice.
they sent some back that are signed, which is
Oh, that's
cool.
awesome. That's so awesome. Oh my God. It's a pretty cool job, I gotta say. You have a pretty cool job there, Blake. And when I was looking at the Tops project, and again, it's because I'm a degen, so excuse me. But like really, like the art, it's so modern, it's so fresh. It felt like it just really gives me, and I know because we just talked about it, it gives me an NFT vibe. It gives me a lot of these newer artists that are coming in with just using, I don't know, I'm not the experienced with art. I don't know all the words and mediums and all this, but it just feels like you use different mediums, you use different ways, when considering at least the technology itself. Have you come across any specific projects or ideas that have sparked your interest? Because when I saw Tops, like I was like, oh my God, like that oven itself seems like it's like a 10,000 PFP project. But
Mhm.
just curious in terms of the technology and you using different mediums, new landscapes, have
Yeah.
you seen anything
Well,
that's made you, yeah.
yeah, I think that like in terms of the creation of art, I've always been drawn to very analog stuff. I like to use my hands. I like to build stuff that
Yeah.
I can touch and feel and smell and whatever. So when I got recruited to the Tops thing, it wasn't really a question in my mind where like whichever cards I was going to be designing, I was going to first be painting them with paint on canvas and making a thing. And then I would photograph that, take that digital image, give that to Tops where it gets resized and printed as a small card. And that was like pretty rare that from like the 20 artists that they recruited for Project 2020, I think maybe 5 of the 20 were making like a physical artworks. JK5 was, Ermsey was, Gregory Sif was, but like a lot of the artists were doing it digitally. And there's pros and cons to both. Like digitally is nice
Yeah.
because there's an undo button. You know, you can't be
Yeah.
sitting there on a canvas and be like, you know what, I'm just going to go back 5 steps and just see if I can take it a different direction, which is fun sometimes and sometimes not. So I think that like it introduced me to new ways of doing it digitally, but not that I would do it, just like appreciating what other people are doing, right? And I alluded to earlier with the bubbles and cactus stuff of how Tops kind of taught me how delegation, or basically being like a creative director, can be just as creatively fulfilling as being the creator of something. And so then I started to meet digital artists, you know, with these other Tops cards, and did some collaborations there, and also just like tapped into that network where I hadn't been aware of yet, or at least informed about.
Now, in terms of, you know, your story and your art and just kind of, you know, everything that you've accomplished, was what did you met Jared Faison while working at Tops,
No, this was
or was
long
that
before. It
before?
was long
This
before
was long
Tops.
before.
And in fact, when I met Jared, 2017, 2018, my focus was making art for offices. And so I had kind of like, I had left my career in marketing, and I had worked in marketing and like kind of PR. And so like the marketing agencies, the PR firms, those were just like the people that I knew. And so I was like,
Mm.
I was just trying to do it out of convenience, right? Okay, that's
Right.
my
It's your
niche.
network. Yeah.
My niche is the people I already know. And so I was doing art for offices and did some really cool projects that I'm really proud of. And I think that if I had not met Jared and kind of pivoted into the sports, I think that I could have done very well in that niche too, because the difference of like, if you're dealing with an artist, like I was focusing on companies that had moved out of a co-working space into their first office, probably raised a Series A, and then they just had a budget for art and culture. And I figured if I could get in front of the right people that have this money that they have to spend on art that's not their own money, I'm going to have an easier time selling them
Smart.
the things that I was making. And so that's what I did for a while. But then when I met Jared, he was like, dude, your stuff is awesome. You should paint for athletes. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I think it's
Me
awesome, and I
too.
think I should too, but how do I do that? And he's like, oh, well, I can introduce you and, you know, do a couple of these guys for free, and then you're going to get your foot in the door. And I didn't have a ton going on at the time, so I'm always down to work for free a little bit. And so I did that, and very quickly it was apparent that that was going to be a good niche for me, and I was getting a lot of referral work, and I enjoyed sports. I played sports as, you know, as a kid, so it just seemed to make sense. But, you know, it wasn't until I guess 2 years after that of just painting athletes and painting, that's like the 250 number that you had said. That was about like, that's when Tops found me.
I think it's important to for people out there who just look at some of these top artists like yourselves and like the journey. Like, how did you get to this point,
Yeah.
right? Like, you didn't just all of a sudden, you know, you're on the scene painting for Tops. You paid your dues, hours, thousands of hours in the studio, creating, working for free, proving yourself, trying, experimenting. Shit just doesn't happen overnight. And I think that's kind of one of the things about the NFT space, where these people are like instant successes, instant millionaires because of marketing and pyramids and schemes, versus the real, like when NFT started, just in my opinion, it was the one-of-one art, like those one-offs, like the real art about it. And then it got bastardized by those bastards who rug pulled us all.
And if I could
Yeah.
I'd love to add to that, because that reminds me, that's such a freaking great point. And you spoke about this in your story, right? You have a digital marketing background.
Mhm.
There's often this conflict between the artist and then the salesperson, right?
Mhm.
You're an artist and you're like, how the hell do I sell? So you went through this process. You mentioned like 6 months of just the art process,
Mhm.
like not knowing if you could sell. How am I going to sell?
Mhm.
But then you tapped into that digital marketing background. Luckily, you had that background, and you can't. And to me, it was exactly what you would think about in marketing. When you were creating the art, you were trying to find out where your art landed,
Mhm.
and you found out that it landed at offices.
Mhm.
And that's how you were able to then strategize.
Mhm.
That's such an interesting way to
Nice.
think about it. And it's what the artists usually are missing, is that marketing and sales piece.
Mhm.
I found that so smart. And again, obviously you have that background, but you used it. But Yeah, can you just talk about that conflict that artists have when it comes to the sales marketing piece? And you take in that 6 months, and then just to bring that forward, you end up selling your 10 pieces within like an hour.
Yeah, so that was like pretty early on, in working in marketing and working for all these different businesses. It was very clear to me that from the clients that I worked with, the ones that were successful all knew exactly who their customer was and what they were providing for that customer. And so they could lock in. And the companies that I come in, they want to market their thing. Who's your customer? Everyone's our customer. Oh, what do you offer them? Oh, all these things,
Everything.
people have a difficult time focusing. And so I knew that I needed to pick like a niche. And like you said, like I pulled basically where my art was going. And that's kind of how I landed in that office niche, which was
Niche.
cool. And then with Jared, I mean, I think that the work within the sports niche was I don't know, I'm even more proud of. So like at first, it was like it's a numbers game. And I had a business in college where I would literally knock on doors, and I would ask them if they wanted a paint job on their house, house painting. And if they did, then I would take their information and I would go and give them an estimate and then hire people and paint their house. And so like I just knew from that, well, life is a numbers game. You just got to ask enough people, and like some people are going to say yes. And so I just
There
started
you go.
Twitter and Instagram DMing every single NFL athlete that
Put
I
in the
could
work.
get a hold of, and showing them the first couple that I had done, which were Jared's clients. And I would say something like, hey, I'm a portrait artist for professional athletes. I just did this one for CJ Anderson. And if you ever need a painting, I'm your guy. And then, out of 100 messages I send, I might get 10 responses. And of those 10, some people would say, awesome, how much? Some would just say like, yeah, here, like, you can do this. And if I tried to say it was going to cost money, then they'd say like, oh, I don't want to pay money for that. But it was like, regardless, like it was just, I'd have at bats, right? And I'd have some shots. And at first I thought that doing paintings just for like exposure was something I was willing to do. Instagram was popping, if the guys would post an Instagram story, sometimes they might, or a post, they could have millions of followers, and that could be customers.
Yep.
And I thought it was like really cool and personal to have their addresses where I'm like, ooh, I'm mailing Antonio Brown his painting to his house, or whatever. And I like took pride in that, but I couldn't tell people. Like even people were like, oh, what's their address? Where do they live? I'm like, I'm not gonna fucking tell you. It's like private, right? And so then it like clicked for me one day where somebody had me mail a painting to their training facility, and then at training facilities, the staff will open packages for the athletes to like make sure it's not,
Right.
I don't know,
Right.
stalker shit or some way, I don't know, something dangerous. And so they like open and vet the mail, and then they put the mail into the lockers for these players. And NFL lockers, I have since found out, are generally pretty standard size. And so I
Yeah.
figured out the biggest size painting that would fit in an NFL locker and be sitting kind of underneath their
Smart.
jersey, so that, they would come into the locker room and they would have a painting. And I would target 2 or 3 guys. And this was like over a lot of A/B testing and like planning this, but I would find 2 or 3 players who were good players, a lot of like got playing time, well respected, but not the superstars. And in fact, like not
Good move.
usually not even on the cusp of being a superstar, like maybe a promising rookie or sophomore or something, young guy. And I would hit them up and say, hey, I did these painting, this is what I do. If I do a painting for you for free, will you post about it on social media? And when I would say that, if they would respond, they would almost always say yes. Now, whether I could actually get them to post was a different story. There's definitely some attrition there.
Yeah, right.
But I would pick,
forgetfulness, convenient forgetfulness.
yeah. And so then I would do all 3 of those kind of mid-tier players on that one team, and they would all be on the same team. I do them all at the same time. I would ship them all at the same time, but in separate boxes.
All right.
And then so sometimes I woke up to text messages where it was a photo of like lockers in a locker room where like 2 or 3 of them each had a painting in it. And the guy's like, well, how do I get one? Like these guys both have one, right? And they're both,
Demand, create the
and
demand.
they're all competitive
Smart.
by nature. So like one guy gets a painting and the next guy's like,
shit,
well,
I
I
want
want a
one.
bigger one. I want
That's
2.
awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Be my dog.
that's a great way. It's a
Yeah,
great way to
dogs
start
are
a bidding
popular.
war.
Yeah.
So to final question,
Mhm.
I'd love to bring the the sports world and the art world together and wrap this up in a way that we can maybe provide some actionable advice to our audience. So we are the Immutable Mindset. We are a Web3 NFT blockchain show. NFTs are providing a new way for younger artists to monetize their art in the same way that NIL does, name, image, likeness, right? It's allowing younger athletes to monetize their art in a way they never have before either. How do you see the parallel evolution impacting the future of creative expression in sports? And what challenges or opportunities might arise as a result? Because I know you have two nephews, right? Are they asking you about this stuff? Are they curious about this stuff?
They're too young for like they're 7 and 4. So they're not at the understanding NFT. They're not asking about NFTs yet. But I mean, I think that it's interesting. I think that like Web3 is this wonderful toolkit of potential that I think that like we've really only kind of tapped that like very minimally scratched the surface. And we've seen these different kind of cycles and different types of projects doing well. And like I started on Super Rare. I got introduced by Micah Johnson, who made Aku. He was a baseball player, and I had interviewed him on a baseball and art podcast, and he was like, "You got to get into crypto art." This was in 2020 during Project 2020. He's like, I don't know what crypto art is, but he explained it. And I was like, well, that sounds like something I could just add on top of what I'm already doing and like maybe make more money. So he introduced me to Super Rare, and I got on there and I started selling one of ones. And after a little bit of like learning the market, I started to sell more. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like artists by nature are creative people. And so we see problems differently, we see opportunities differently. And so it's just so fun to see how artists capitalize on different opportunities and what they create from it. And so for me, like I love the
Are you seeing?
NFTs. Oh, go ahead.
So yeah, are you seeing any? Are you seeing any new capitalization? Are you seeing artists capitalize their artistry in new ways due to this technology? Just curious.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that like from the most basic standpoint of like an artist like myself who's tapping into their existing archives that we've already like made money from, but hopefully like selling those paintings, right? And now we're using these digital images and repurposing that art into a new way to monetize. And so that was cool to be a part of an experience. And then also like getting into like generative art, right? And these bigger collections.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I started, when it clicked in my head of like the Bored Apes, which I passed on, silly, but I was like, I don't get it. Like
Silly.
why would I want, like, I literally like passed up getting a bunch of Bored Apes so that I could go and buy like one or two one of ones from these obscure artists from that, like, they just didn't do anything. And I was spending like 1 ETH
Yeah.
for a piece or 2 ETH or whatever. It felt like monopoly money to me because I was making it by selling my own art. And then I would want to go out and just like keep it in that ecosystem. But I totally like misread that opportunity. It was like the one of ones, this is where it's going to be. And then Bored Apes really took off. But like, I just remember going through and then cycling and looking at all the images and being like, oh, I get how they did that. Oh, cool. The nose is like a different layer. Ooh, the fur, like that process was like, like now it's like, oh, of course that's how they do that. But like when I'm first dissecting it and looking at it, I'm like, how do they do
Yeah.
that? That was like really interesting and fascinating to me. And I think opened the door to myself learning how to delegate and like project manage and creative direct, which eventually brought me to Knights of Degen, which has a 10K, well, 8,888 PFP collection. And yeah, I mean, it was a fun challenge. And like, I can see now, at this point, Knights coming up on 2 years in October. And
Yep.
so it's been a long time. And oftentimes I will do a piece of art. I will love it. I'll think it's the best thing that I've ever made. And then I reflect back on it, a year or two later. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. I'm proud that I made that then, but it's not my best work. Right. And so I can see, like, I learned a lot doing the generative art for the first time with Knights of Degen. Some of the
Yeah.
layers didn't line up right. I had to like, they're just little things that for me as a perfectionist artist and not knowing how to do generative art beforehand, I was like, oh, well, okay, now I know. And then we did the Steeds collection, followed that up last year. And I feel like the art was a lot cleaner, a lot like, I just felt a lot better about, okay, now I know how to do generative art. But
That's the plight of the artist. You gotta dive right in, jump right in.
yeah.
Perfect. Really appreciate you breaking that down, Blake. Really do. And so we are almost at the end of the show.
Mhm.
And before we end, I do like to take notes kind of as we're going through and give some takeaways, actionable advice to the audience based on our conversation we had. So just some notes for some of the conversation we had today. First, embrace your unique path. Blake's journey to becoming a successful artist was not a linear one. His background in economics and digital marketing played an essential role in shaping his artistic career. Remember that your unique experience and skills will contribute to your success. Two, pursue those passions. When Blake decided to make a change on his 30th birthday, he chose to follow his passion for art. He burned the boats and went for it. Go for it. Don't be scared. Be open to chance encounters. Blake's connection, we talked about Jared Faison, right? Met a gentleman. That gentleman connected him with other people that wanted to breathe his art and understand it. That led him to more. And all of a sudden, he made a career out of art.
Mhm.
Be open to chance encounters. Adapt and innovate. Blake's exploration of NFTs and communitized art projects showcases his willingness to adapt. It's an ever-changing art landscape, and you need to be following the trends and stay on board. We just talked about that.
Mhm.
And then lastly, share your story. I'll say this: Blake's upcoming children's book demonstrates the power of storytelling to me. You went on a vacation, you had a thought, you had a creation, and then now you're putting it in place.
Mhm.
Share your story; it matters. Reflect on your own journey and passions, and consider how you'll integrate them into your career and your personal projects. I think this is a masterclass in that, Blake. It was absolutely a pleasure. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for
Thank
joining
you,
us,
Blake.
Blake. I really do
Yeah. I
appreciate
wanna
it.
I wanna add in
Um,
2 things to
please,
that.
please,
I think that
please do.
that something like all of that I agree with, but I think that one of the missing pieces, for me at least, was, number 1, like, you have to be super clear about what you want. And this could be professionally or just in life in general, but, like, you have to decide. Because if you don't have this goal, like, laid out and kind of detailed, well, where do I like, what kind of life do I wanna live? How do I wanna spend my day? Who do I wanna be around? Spending time on that, I think, is really useful time. And then the other thing that, like, after you kind of have that figured out, ask for what you want. And that's just something that so many people miss, is they just don't ask.
Gotta
And
ask, man.
sometimes that's physically asking, saying, "Hey, I need help. I need this thing. I need this support." But it's also, like, for me, and I'm getting goosebumps now saying this, it's asking
Me
the
too.
universe,
Me too.
right? It's asking the universe. You decide, "Okay, I wanna live on the I wanna remodel this barn, and I wanna build this creative sanctuary that's gonna attract world-class artists from all over the world so that I can just continue to
Yeah.
create something new every single day," right? It's crystal clear. Now I go to the universe and say, "Okay, that's what I want. Show me what to do." And it will give me the ideas, and it will show me how to do it. And it doesn't mean that I know exactly how to do it right, and I know how to go and like this music studio, like I've torn down these walls and rebuilt them up to make them like very soundproof several times because I'm like learning as I go, right? But I'm still like I've I've gotten really good at asking for what I want from the people that I love and from the universe, and that I think is something that differentiates me from people that's like it's not even a difference, it's just a choice of like, I just ask, and then it's easier to
Just
get
Man,
the
ask.
things you want.
Just ask.
and if you're not a creator or artist listening and you're not inspired and motivated by that, man, I don't know what. That goosebumps, still goosebumps. Blake, again, thank you. Please let the people know where to find you on socials. And I know that you guys are going live on the wait, is the garden live?
Yeah, so the Hideaway Garden one, we're gonna wait where we won't release with this episode. I thought
Okay.
and just to, like, give you guys a little bit of like, I'm trying to figure out a Web3 angle for my gardening, and part of the gardening that's so
Nice.
the attraction to it is that it's not commercial. I can't just go and sell a plant, right? I'm just the joy is watching it grow and be different every day. So, I'm trying to figure out a way, and
Mm.
I've got a couple advisors, Drew actually being one of them, of, like, bouncing ideas, but I kind of jumped the shark a little bit when I was like, "This is gonna be live by the time our show comes out," because the truth is I'm still figuring out what that
It's all an
angle is.
iteration. It's all an
Yeah.
iteration, man.
So the best way to find me is on Twitter. It's just my name, Blake Jamieson. You can find me on Instagram that way too, even though my handle is Athlete Portraits. And then my website is blake.art.
You're lucky you got that
Awesome.
one.
Perfect.
Yeah, well, I'm still
Yeah.
holding out for blake.com. I'm trying to get it. Every year I make offers on it, and this
One of
guy
these
that has
days.
it doesn't even use it, which pisses me off. But
Blake,
Blake.art is an amazing one. But everyone's like I'll tell people my email address, blake@blake.art, and they're like, "Oh, cool, .com,
no,
blake@blake.art.com." I'm like, "No,
just .art.
just that." And so
Dot art, guys.
it does provide some confusion sometimes.
Nah, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. All right. And to wrap up the show, and to everybody listening at home, we greatly, greatly appreciate you. If you enjoyed what you heard today, tell a friend about us. Take 15 seconds, leave a comment. It helps us out, and we really appreciate it. I greatly appreciate you again, Blake, for joining us on the Immutable Mindset. Please follow us on all our social media channels at Immutable Show. Subscribe, comment, and network. Thanks for joining us. Catch us next week for more. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.